So, day one of Tectonics Glasgow 2024. Now, before I get started, let me get my apology in before I start butchering some of these names because inevitably I'm going to do that, and I apologize to everyone affected. Um, this was a first for me. Now, I've been to most of the festivals, not all of them, but most of them since I think 2013. Um, but I'd never previously been to an event in the recital room. That's just a sort of social anxiety thing. I've never gone to get a ticket for that. This time I did because Kate Armitage and friends were due to perform now. Unfortunately, Kate is unwell, so she and THF Drenching, Stuart Carlton, weren't able to be present. However, there was still a trio, Dave Jackson, Helmut Lemke, and Vyman Foxy Red Spiders. And it began with mostly small sounds, but all with tangible physical presence, which grew louder, particularly the vocals. There was what could have been taken for melancholy or nostalgia to the overall effect at times, particularly in the beginning, in the first half. Um, there was percussion, creaks, whistles, wails, call and response between the players. Vocals from Vyman Foxy Red Spiders at times were reminiscent of what Kate might have done had she been able to be there. Helmut's setup included a loop of amplified model railway. And when I say that, I don't mean a tape loop or a digital loop. What I mean is an actual physical model railway with a little train running around it, the sounds of which were amplified. And Dave, of course, had his sax, but he began with smaller sound-making objects. And although they'd never played together as a trio before, the sounds always worked well together. Their loudest and most cacophonous, it was like listening to an upstairs neighbour watching a horror movie at volume while a band rehearsed across the road as he fell asleep. And then the sounds receded. Should also note Helmut's lab coat with deliberately inconclusive investigations printed on the back. From the recital room, went downstairs for the first official event, ticketed event in the old fruit market. This was Sarah Jane Summers and Johanni Silvola with the BBC Scottish Symphony Orchestra playing a piece in two parts called The Spirit Multitude. Doesn't say here whether this is a premiere, so I'm going to assume probably not. It says here in the programme that they combine Scottish traditional music from the Highlands with influences from Scandinavian traditions and experimental music, which more or less matches what I'd written before I'd read that. So they opened with rising and falling groans and howls and whispers. There were snippets of what sounded like folk tunes and they either were snippets of folk tunes or things that were doing a very good job of sounding like folk tunes. There was then some flowing romantic melody, which then progressed into a roar and was succeeded by percussive strings. There were some near electronic sounds in that section generated that for a moment could have been from a 1970s horror or science fiction movie. The sounds subsided and the folk melody returned. And more sounds came back that were reminiscent of romanticism. It sort of progressed through these steps, these various things: folk, romanticism, more kind of experimental things. Uh, the electric guitar grew more present and then faded back to scratchings under the orchestra and then shaded out altogether. And it all finished with a dance tune. Um, for some reason, I haven't marked this as a highlight. It was very good. I mean, so too was the opening improvisation in the recital room. But for things to be a highlight, generally they need to be more unfamiliar to me and to sort of punch me in the face, which, metaphorically speaking, was what happened in the Grand Hall next with Aiko Yamada doing a piece called Traces of Air. This was um, a piece or a couple of pieces with recorders, one with a fairly standard recorder, one with a much larger instrument. It opened with birdsong like recorded tones, but there was a lot more happening than that suggests. Much more texture, sort of very clear differentiation between breath and instrument. Um, Usually, much more than one sound happening at any moment, and a real demonstration throughout both this first section and the second section of the phenomenal stamina and control that Daiko Yamada had. Um, and then in the second section, sort of physicalizing with humor the nature of the instrument as a tube through which air is blown, air which is shaped to different sounds by blocking different holes along that tube. But that blowing doesn't have to be neutral and near soundless. It can instead be like blowing a raspberry, which she kind of did. Sort of, and I've written here, I'm not quite sure what I meant by this, but a sense of a body and instrument impacting each other, or certainly interacting in a very obvious and very present way. Um, after that, which was a highlight, Aiko Yamada certainly found my mind drifting off. I would close my eyes and start seeing all kinds of stuff. That's usually a good sign of a highlight. Um, but downstairs to the old fruit market for Marlo Delara, who you may in the past have been aware of as Marlo Eggplant, and Ewan Curry. This was, I think, an improvisation. Yes, this says live improvisation here. Drawing on voices, electronics, and field recordings. So breath turns to voice and back again, and then voice. At the same time, electronics were mimicking the physicality of an organ, that physical sound. Voice and other sounds were manipulated. There were splashes, cracks, clatters. It was good. Um, Definitely good, definitely skilled, definitely worth listening to. But there were a couple of things that occurred to me. The first of which I'll mention here. Um, it it was a reminder, and the fact that this was on my mind and that I wrote it down is probably an indicator that I wasn't fully engaged. It was a reminder of why I dropped electronics uh, in my own sound making early on, so that I could concentrate solely on the voice, uh, because it was just too much shit to deal with and keep maintained. But anyway, through loud and quiet passages, some of which were more melodic, some of which were more drony, the voice came in and out, sometimes subtle, at others more present. The voices, both recorded and live, interested me more than the electronics, and this is coming up very shortly to the uh, second thing, which is that I've heard at various gigs a lot of uh, electronic rumbles, crackles, manipulated sounds, and I don't know why. To me, they just become this kind of grey sludge to my ears after not very long, which is it's unfair on the artists because this wasn't bad. You know, this is a personal failing, uh, but I mostly wasn't interested, and I found myself checking the time more than once. Again, listen when it's on Radio 3. Um, I promise you, if that's what you're into, you will probably enjoy it. I might even enjoy it more than I did live. So unfortunately, that is not a highlight. But what followed in the same space, the Old Fruit Market, uh, was a highlight. That was Elaine Mitchner. Now, there's caveat there, nothing to do with the performance. So the first piece was a near 50-year-old piece by Ollie Wilson, Sometimes, which is a deconstructed version of Sometimes I Feel Like a Motherless Child. The performance was beautiful and powerful, but for me, the whole piece was was too long, and I didn't think that the way it was deconstructed added anything to the song. If anything, it kind of got in the way because the things that it was deconstructing and that it was spending its time concentrating on were either pretty much irrelevant and meaningless or the most blaringly obvious aspects. So, performance great, song not so much. So then we had Unknown Tongue 2, which I think had improvised elements within it if it wasn't wholly improvised. Certainly gave the impression of being improvised, but you know that can be a skill of performance. Um, and it was sung as Elaine Mitchell was weaving through the audience and was reacting to the space. And this being the Old Fruit Market, that includes old signs for various businesses, lots of names of companies and individuals. Um, that was great. Alarmed some of the audience. You know, people often don't like to interact with the artist. And Elaine Mitchell then closed with an arrangement of her own of Amazing Grace, which to me was everything that sometimes that version of Motherless Child was everything that should have been. Uh, because it felt more purposeful, it provided a better opportunity to display the strength, control, and versatility of Elaine Mitchell's voice, and it served the song. It didn't sort of have that hyperfixation on irrelevancies or the most glaringly obvious things that Motherless Child did. So I then took a break. I skipped out on the Meet the Artists event. I have never been to one of these. Maybe next year. Um, Again, this is my social anxiety coming out. So I went for lunch. I went down to Glasgow Green, lunch, a quick sort of tea time snack. Glasgow Green, came back, and we were in the Great Hall for um, three performances. Two with the BBC Scottish Symphony Orchestra and one solo performance. And that was in two halves. So in the first half, that opened with Mark Yates, a composition, called Point in the Landscape. This was a world premiere, and this is what I like. Fractured, discordant. Some of the orchestra were dispersed to the balcony around the space, so you were fully immersed. And the focus of the piece was constantly shifting. There were several things happening at once. It was a glorious confusion, this series of overlapping conversations and monologues, except forming a greater whole rather than becoming formless noise as actual overlapping conversations can. At least they can to my neurodivergent brain, which often struggles to focus on even one conversation, particularly if there's more than one other person present. Here, because there was no semantic content to unpack, there was none of the verbal or physical cues that require interpretation that would be there in an interpersonal contact. Because all of that was absent, I could just be engulfed by the sound and enjoy it. It was potentially overstimulating, but when it's music, that's fine. So that was a highlight, possibly the highlight of the day. It's really hard to tell. It's between that Aiko Yamada and I've forgotten what. I think the other highlight has not come yet. In fact, here it is. This was a composition of Salvatore Schiarino, which was played by Ilya Gringolds, and it's titled Sei Nuovi Capricci e un Saluto for solo violin, and I apologise for the absolutely shameful pronunciation. That was a UK premiere, and it was an exploration of the breath and the voice of the violin. It started out as if the violin were at a distance, and then unfolded into the violin as if it were a living thing, as if it were a child playing with the sounds that it can make. The faintest sounds with space on all sides of them, and broken by sudden loud flurries, and later melody kept threatening to break out but never quite did. Not a lot of notes on that or on the following piece, I think largely because I was getting tired, although I have to say, much as I always enjoy Tectonics and every night, sometimes the days can feel a little long. This time it didn't, and it didn't finish that significantly later than it has previously, I don't think. Anyway, we took a brief break and then came back with I just threw away the program. Piece composed, or maybe possibly a sequence of pieces composed by Mariam Rezai and Matthew Shlomowitz. 6 scenes for turntables and orchestra. And you would think that turntables and orchestra would be tough to combine, that they wouldn't really fit that well. They would sort of exist in very different sonic spaces, but honestly, it wasn't always easy to pick apart exactly which sounds originated where. Mostly you could, but not always. And Mariam, with her turntables and her phenomenal turntablism skill, introduced an element of performance that can often be lacking from standard orchestral performances. Overall, the piece was upbeat and percussive. It took in a range of styles. And unfortunately, again, as I said, not a lot of notes on this. I enjoyed it. I would have to put it as a highlight. I can't say that for me it's this was the UK premiere of this. Um, I can't say that it was as much of a highlight as the Salvatore Schiarino piece, or as the Mark Yates piece, but still bloody impressive. And that's everything that I have to say about day one of Tectonics. Um, and I will see you at some point very late on Sunday or very early on Monday with day two. All right. See you soon. Bye.